bravery saved the Apache woman from outlaws. That night, everything changed. The sun was low in the sky, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. The wind carried the dry scent of sand and sagebrush across the open land, whispering through the sparse trees and rocks. On a narrow trail near the edge of a small frontier town, a solitary figure rode steadily on a chestnut horse, Best. His name was James, a man whose broad shoulders and worn boots spoke of years spent outdoors, living with the harshness of the wild. He had once been a soldier, moving from one distant battlefield to another, but now he sought quiet and peace. He had built a modest life on the edge of the desert, in a small cabin where the wind howled at night, and the stars were brighter than they had ever been in the cities he once knew. James loved the solitude, but he was also alert. The desert had taught him that danger could appear suddenly, and that one had to always be ready. As he rode along the trail, the soft crunch of his horse's hooves on the dirt was the only sound. The town behind him was quiet, too small to offer much excitement or trouble. People there respected him because he was fair and steady, but they did not know much about his past. That was fine with James. He preferred it that way. As he rounded a curve near a cluster of rocks, he noticed something unusual in the distance. A figure was running frantically across the open desert, kicking up dust with every hurried step. At first, James thought it might be a traveler lost in the desert heat. But then he saw the shadows following the figure. They were not just shadows of the sun, they were men on horseback, chasing with purpose. His instincts tightened. Danger was near. Without thinking twice, James spurred his horse forward. The rider in front, he could now see more clearly, was a young woman. Her long, dark hair whipped in the wind, and her face was pale with fear. Her clothing was simple but clean, and the way she ran suggested she was accustomed to the outdoors, not a stranger to life in the wilderness. James could see the outlaws behind her, 3 rough-looking men on horses, shouting and brandishing weapons. Their faces were hardened with cruelty, and their horses moved like predators closing in on prey. James's heart beat faster, but not with fear. He felt a surge of determination. He had seen people in danger before, and he had learned that hesitation could cost lives. He urged his horse to run faster, the chestnut's muscles rippling beneath him as it galloped across the dry trail. Dust flew up behind them, creating a cloud that obscured the pursuers for a moment, but James knew it would not last. He closed the distance quickly, his mind calculating the best way to help the young woman without endangering her more.
As he approached, he shouted, "Over here!"
"Take cover!" The woman glanced back, eyes wide, and for a fleeting moment he thought she might not trust him. But the fear in her expression was clear. She had no one else to rely on. James guided his horse to move beside her, matching her pace as best he could.
"Hold on!" he said firmly.
"I'll get you out of this." The outlaws were now closer, their horses snorting and hooves pounding the earth. James could see the anger and determination in their eyes. They were not just trying to chase her. They wanted to capture her, and James knew they would not stop until they had. Without warning, James pulled his horse slightly to the side, creating a barrier between the young woman and the men chasing her. He could feel the adrenaline in his veins as he prepared for whatever might come next. The outlaws hesitated for a moment, surprised to see another rider appear so suddenly. That hesitation was enough. "Ride with me," James called. The young woman obeyed, climbing closer to his side. He guided her toward a narrow canyon path he knew well, one that twisted and turned, making it difficult for anyone unfamiliar to follow. The horses behind them roared with frustration as they tried to navigate the rocky terrain. James used every trick he had learned from years in the wild, sharp turns, sudden drops, and quick maneuvers to slow the pursuers. The woman's breathing was ragged, and she held on tightly to James's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible over the pounding of hooves. I didn't know who else to turn to." "You're safe now," James said, though his voice carried a firmness that left no room for doubt. "But just keep holding on." The canyon narrowed, and the outlaws had to slow down. Rocks and shrubs created obstacles, and James used the terrain to his advantage. At one point, he leapt his horse over a fallen log, causing the men behind them to swerve dangerously. A branch caught one outlaw's hat, sending it flying into the dust. The young woman's eyes widened in astonishment as she realized how skilled James was. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, James found a hidden path that led up a gentle slope to a more open area. The outlaws had been slowed enough that they began to give up the chase, frustrated and exhausted. James did not stop, though. He continued riding until they reached a safe spot where the desert stretched wide and no immediate threat remained. He guided the young woman to the edge of a small grove of trees where they could rest for a moment. She collapsed onto the ground, breathing heavily, and James dismounted, checking both their horses quickly. They were tired, but unharmed. "You saved me," the woman said, looking at him with a mix of relief and curiosity. I don't even know your name."
"James," he replied simply.
"You're welcome, but we should keep moving."
"They might come back." She dotted, gathering herself. "I'm a Hyoka," she said. Her voice was soft, yet there was a quiet strength in it, a courage that James had not expected. He noticed the determination in her eyes, even after the fear she had just endured. James helped her mount his horse, positioning her carefully behind him. They moved on slowly at first, then with increasing speed as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The desert was vast and unforgiving, but James knew it well. He knew where they could find shelter, water, and cover if the outlaws returned. As they rode, he thought about the woman's story, though she had only shared fragments so far. There was a sense that she carried more than just fear. There was a purpose, a reason why she had been pursued. James's instincts told him that this was not a simple robbery or random act of cruelty. He did not know the details yet, but he knew he had to protect her. The sky turned deeper shades of orange and red, then purple, as the sun sank behind the distant mountains. The desert cooled, and the wind became softer, carrying the scent of evening flowers and dry grass. James and Ahioka rode in silence for a while, each lost in thought. The danger had passed for now, but the memory of it lingered. Eventually, James guided her toward a small hidden stream where they could rest and let the horses drink. He dismounted again and offered her a hand. She accepted it gratefully, her trust in him growing with every passing moment. As they sat by the water, James looked at her carefully. She was young, perhaps barely in her 20s, but her eyes held a wisdom and resilience beyond her years. He wondered what had brought her to this peril, why the outlaws had been after her, and what she had risked to survive. For now, though, they were safe. Back. James knew the night would bring new challenges, but he felt a strange sense of connection with Ahioka. She had survived the chase, and he had helped her. In the vast, lonely desert, that was enough to start something new. A bond forged in courage, trust, and the quiet strength of those who faced danger together. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, James felt a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a promise of more adventures, more challenges, and perhaps a chance for both of them to discover something unexpected in the quiet heart of the desert. And in that moment, he knew that life was about to change for both of them. The sun had dipped completely behind the mountains, leaving the desert bathed in the soft glow of twilight. James led Ahioka away from the stream and into a narrow canyon that he knew well. The canyon was hidden from the main trails, a secret path he had used many times when traveling alone or needing to avoid trouble. As they walked, the horses following quietly behind. The wind carried the faint sound of distant coyotes calling to each other, a reminder that the desert was never truly empty. Ahioka's eyes darted nervously to every shadow, every rock, as if expecting the outlaws to appear again at any moment. "Do you think they will follow us?" she asked softly. Her voice was steady, but the tension in her body betrayed her fear. "They might," James said honestly, scanning the canyon walls and the trail ahead. "But we're moving where they won't find us easily. And even if they do, I know ways to keep us safe."
Hyoka nodded, her expression a mixture of relief and curiosity.
She had spent her life in the open, traveling with her people, but she had rarely encountered someone like James, someone calm, confident, and capable in the face of danger. She felt a strange sense of trust toward him, though she knew she could not afford to let her guard down completely.
They reached a small clearing where the canyon opened slightly.
The ground was soft with sand, and a few scattered trees offered some cover. James dismounted and helped Ahioka do the same. He handed her a water skin, and she drank slowly, savoring the cool water. Her hands trembled slightly, not from thirst, but from the adrenaline that still ran through her body. "Piss. You're strong," she said finally, looking at him with admiration. "Most people would have been too scared to even try to stop them," James shrugged modestly. "I've had my share of trouble. You learn a few things along the way." He looked at her carefully, sensing there was more to her story than she had shared. "Why were they after you?" he asked gently.
Ahioka hesitated, glancing away at the rocks surrounding them.
The desert shadows seemed to grow longer as the sun disappeared completely, and she felt a chill despite the warm evening air.
It's
"Complicated," she admitted. "I didn't want them to find me. I couldn't let them take something that belongs to my people." "Something very important." James waited patiently, giving her the time she needed. He did not press further, knowing that some stories were only shared when a person was ready. After a moment, Ahioka spoke again, her voice quieter now. I carry a sacred artifact from my tribe. The outlaws want it."
They will do anything to get it. It's not just gold or money. They want power.
"I had to run. I had no choice." Brass. James nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He had seen greed and cruelty in many forms during his life, but there was something different here. This was not random violence. It was deliberate, dangerous, and deeply personal. Protecting her would require more than courage. It would require strategy, patience, and careful planning. "We'll keep moving," he said, helping her back onto her horse. "I know a place where we can hide for the night, somewhere they won't think to look." The canyon path twisted and turned, narrowing in places and opening into small hidden clearings, where the desert seemed to disappear into shadows.
James guided Ahioka carefully, making sure her horse followed the safest route.
The night was quiet except for the occasional sound of rustling leaves, the soft steps of their horses, and the distant call of an owl. As they traveled, Ahioka began to share more about herself. "I was born in a small village near the mountains," she said. "Our people have lived there for generations. We have traditions, stories, and objects that have been passed down for hundreds of years. The artifact they want, it's one of the most important. It's not something to sell or trade. Pay. It's part of our history, our identity."
James listened carefully, nodding as she spoke.
He had learned long ago that every person carries their own battles, their own reasons for what they do. Hearing her story, he felt a deeper sense of responsibility. This was not just about saving someone from outlaws. It was about protecting something sacred, something that could not be replaced. Eventually, they reached a hidden spot, known only to James. It was a small, abandoned stone cabin, partially hidden by rocks and trees, far enough from the main trail that it would be nearly invisible to anyone passing by. The door hung slightly off its hinges, and the roof was worn, but it was sturdy enough to provide shelter.
James led Ahioka inside, checking carefully for any signs of danger. "This should be safe for the night," he said, helping her dismount.
"We can rest here, plan our next move in the morning." Ahioka looked around the cabin, her eyes wide with relief. "Thank you," she said again. "I don't know what I would have done without you." "You don't have to thank me," James replied. "We'll figure this out together."
"But we have to be careful. They might come back, and we need to be ready."
Inside the cabin, the air was cool and smelled faintly of dust and old wood. James gathered some firewood and started a small fire in the corner, the flames flickering and casting long shadows on the walls. Ahioka watched, fascinated by the way he moved, confident and calm, even in the face of danger.
She had grown up learning to survive, but there was a difference between surviving alone and surviving with someone who knew how to protect you.
As the fire crackled, James offered her some dried meat and bread he had carried with him. She ate slowly, still cautious but grateful for the small comforts.
"You've traveled far," she observed. "You always carry food with you?" James smiled faintly. "But you learn to carry what you need in the desert. You never know when help or trouble might be far away." They ate in silence for a while, each lost in thought. The night outside was quiet, but both knew that it could change at any moment. James kept the fire low, listening carefully to the sounds around the cabin. Every rustle, every distant animal call, every whisper of the wind could hide danger or opportunity. Finally, Ahioka spoke again, her voice hesitant but determined. "Burden," she said. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. "You've already risked so much to help me." "Why are you doing this?" James looked at her, his face serious but kind. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because I know what it's like to feel helpless, to need someone to stand by you when danger comes."
You're not a burden.
"You're a person who needs help, and I'm here to give it." Ahioka studied him, seeing the honesty in his eyes best. She had met people who had lied, who had pretended to care only to take advantage. But James, he was different. There was a quiet strength in him, a steady presence that made her feel safe for the first time since the outlaws had begun chasing her. As the hours passed, they talked more about themselves, sharing small pieces of their lives. James spoke of his time as a soldier, the battles he had fought, and the places he had seen. He did not go into unnecessary detail, but he shared enough for Ahioka to understand who he was, a man shaped by hardship, yet not hardened against kindness. Ahioka shared stories of her village, her family, and the lessons she had learned growing up in the desert. She spoke of courage, respect for nature, and the traditions that guided her people. James listened, fascinated by her perspective and by the wisdom she carried despite her youth. Past. The fire burned low, and the stars appeared through the cracks in the cabin's roof. Outside, the desert was calm, but both knew the danger could return at any moment. They took turns keeping watch, ensuring that they would not be caught by surprise. By the time dawn approached, a sense of quiet trust had grown between them. They were not just two strangers brought together by chance. They were allies, ready to face whatever the desert and the outlaws might throw at them next. James looked at Ahioka and felt a strange sense of hope. For the first time in a long while, He realized that helping someone was not just about survival, it could also be about connection, trust, and perhaps even friendship.
Ahyoka, in turn, felt a new sense of confidence.
She was not alone. She had someone who would stand by her, protect her, and help her face the dangers ahead.
As the first light of morning filtered through the trees, painting the cabin in soft gold, they prepared to leave. The desert awaited, full of unknown challenges, but for now, they were ready to face it together.
The bond they had formed in the quiet of the night would guide them forward, giving them strength, courage, and the determination to survive. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Their lives had changed forever, and the night had set them on a path that neither could have predicted. The sun had finally disappeared behind the distant mountains, leaving the desert in a deep, velvety darkness, bare. Only the silver glow of the moon and the occasional twinkle of stars lit the landscape. The desert, which had seemed peaceful during the day, now felt alive with unseen movements and soft, eerie sounds. James and Ahyoka had returned to the small stone cabin hidden among the rocks and trees, a place James knew well, but few others did. They had spent the afternoon preparing, reinforcing the cabin doors as best they could, and gathering firewood to keep the night from being completely dark and cold. She could still feel the shadow of the outlaws lingering behind them, and the desert at night, though quiet, carried an unsettling sense of unpredictability. She glanced at James, who was calm as ever, quietly checking the surroundings and ensuring that no sudden sound or movement could catch them by surprise. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked softly, her voice barely rising above the whisper of the wind. "They might," James admitted, his eyes scanning the shadows beyond the cabin. "But we're ready."
And we have something they don't know this place like I do.
Ahyoka nodded, though she still felt a chill run through her.
The thought of the men who had chased her earlier returning filled her with a mix of fear and determination.
She had survived the desert, harsh conditions, and even wild animals. But humans driven by greed were far more dangerous than anything nature could throw at her. As night deepened, James set a small fire outside the cabin, not too bright, just enough to give warmth and light while keeping them hidden. He checked the surroundings again and again, ensuring the horses were tethered in a safe spot nearby. Ahyoka helped, carrying water and arranging stones to create small obstacles that could slow down anyone who might approach. Hours passed and the desert remained quiet, almost eerily so. Then, without warning, a faint noise reached James's ears. The soft, rhythmic sound of hooves on sand. Careful, but deliberate. His body tensed, and he motioned for Ahyoka to stay quiet.
"There, close," he whispered.
Ahyoka's heart pounded in her chest. She clutched the small knife she had kept hidden in her belt, her hands trembling slightly but her resolve firm. She had survived before, and she would survive again. But this time, she was not alone. The sound grew louder. 3 shadows appeared on the horizon, moving cautiously toward the cabin. James quickly assessed the situation. There were 3 of them, armed, and they had clearly been tracking them.
He knew they would not be afraid of confrontation. They were desperate and greedy. "We need to be smart," James whispered to Ahyoka.
Follow my lead and stay close. Don't make a sound unless I say so.
Ahyoka nodded, gripping the handle of her knife. She could feel the tension in the air, the way the wind seemed to hold its breath along with them. James quietly crept toward the side of the cabin, peeking around a corner to get a better view of the approaching men. He noticed that they were confident, but slightly cautious. They had not expected anyone to be hiding so close. James had an idea.
He whispered instructions to Ahyoka, who listened intently.
When I distract them, I want you to be ready. Watch my back and use anything you can to help.
Stay calm. Ahioka swallowed her fear and nodded. Bray. She knew that panic would not help. They had to rely on strategy and courage. James stepped out into the moonlight, waving his hands and shouting, "Hey, over here!" The outlaws froze, surprised to see a figure appear suddenly from the shadows. Phew! James's horse snorted loudly, adding to the confusion. The outlaws glanced at each other, uncertain. One of them cursed under his breath and spurred his horse forward. That was the signal. Ahioka, hidden behind a low rock, used her small knife to quietly cut a rope she had prepared earlier. A heavy wooden board, part of an old fence near the cabin, swung down, hitting one of the outlaws' horses on the side. The animal reared up, throwing the rider slightly off balance. Another outlaw tried to aim his gun, but James was already moving, dodging behind the rocks and firing a warning shot into the air. The night erupted into chaos. Sand flew up as the horses stampeded, and shouts filled the air. Ahioka moved quickly, using the terrain to her advantage, tossing rocks and sticks to distract the men.
James engaged them with skill, keeping them off balance and preventing them from getting too close to the cabin.
At one point, one outlaw broke through the initial defenses and came charging directly at James. James sidestepped, grabbed a long stick, and struck the man's horse lightly, causing it to stumble. The outlaw fell to the ground, cursing, as James quickly positioned himself between the man and Ahioka. Ahioka's eyes widened as she saw James injured slightly from a small cut on his arm, but he remained focused. She realized in that moment that she could not just hide. She had to help. Drawing on her own knowledge of the desert and its terrain, she lured one of the outlaws toward a narrow passage filled with rocks. The man struggled to navigate it, and she used the moment to push a loose rock, tripping him and causing him to tumble to the ground. James, seeing her act, felt a surge of pride and relief. Breaths. Together, they were stronger than the outlaws had anticipated. The men had assumed they were chasing two helpless targets, but instead they had met clever, determined opponents who knew the land and were willing to fight. The struggle continued for some time, dashed across the rocks and trees as moonlight reflected off weapons and flying sand. James and Ahioka worked in perfect coordination, moving silently and striking decisively. The outlaws began to realize that they were outmatched, their confidence faltering as every plan they tried failed. Finally, the last of the outlaws attempted to retreat, realizing that the night had turned against them. James called out sharply, "Leave now, and don't come back!" His voice was calm but carried authority, the kind that made even desperate men think twice. The outlaws exchanged nervous glances, then fled into the darkness, disappearing into the desert night, their horses kicking up dust as they ran. Ahioka sank to the ground, breathing heavily, her heart still racing from the intensity of the confrontation. James approached her, checking to make sure she was unharmed.
"Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning the surrounding desert once more.
I'm fine," she said, still trembling slightly.
"I couldn't have done that without you."
James shook his head. "No, we did it together. Brace. You were brave. You helped when it mattered most." The desert settled once again into its quiet, mysterious rhythm. The stars shone above them, and the moonlight cast a gentle glow over the cabin and the surrounding rocks. The air was cool now, carrying the faint scent of sage and dry earth. Both of them knew that the danger could return at any time, but for now they had survived. They returned to the cabin, tending to minor scrapes and ensuring that their horses were calm. James cleaned his small wound while Ahioka carefully bandaged a scratch on her arm. Bang.
They shared a quiet moment by the fire, the glow illuminating their faces.
"You were amazing tonight," James said softly. "I've faced many dangerous situations, but I've never met someone as quick-thinking and brave as you."
Ahyoka blushed slightly, looking down at her hands. I
was scared, but
I had to protect myself. And you. Despot, you risked so much to save me, and I had to do my part too.
James nodded, feeling a deeper bond forming between them.
The night had tested their courage, their intelligence, and their trust in each other. They had faced fear and danger together, and the shared experience had created a connection that went beyond words. As they settled near the fire, keeping watch for any remaining threats, the desert night seemed less menacing. The stars shone brighter, and the wind carried a softer tone, as if the world itself acknowledged their victory. They were not just survivors. They were partners, ready to face whatever came next. The hours passed slowly, but the tension gradually eased. They spoke quietly, sharing stories of past experiences, of challenges they had faced, and of the lessons they had learned. James found himself opening up more than he had in years, and Ahyoka listened with genuine interest, finding comfort in his calm presence and wisdom. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold, both of them felt a sense of accomplishment and relief. But the night had been long and dangerous, but it had also revealed strengths they did not fully recognize in themselves or in each other. They knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The Outlaws might return, and other challenges would surely arise. But for now, they had survived. And in surviving together, they had discovered courage, trust, and a bond that could not be easily broken. The desert remained quiet, the first birds of morning beginning to stir, and the world slowly waking to a new day. James and Ahyoka sat together near the cabin, looking out at the vast expanse of sand and rock. The events of the night had changed them both.
They were no longer simply a man and a woman fleeing danger. They were allies, friends, and something more, connected by the shared trials of the night and the unspoken understanding that they could rely on each other no matter what the future held.
The first light of morning broke over the desert, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The cool air carried the scent of sagebrush and dry earth, filling the hidden canyon with a sense of calm after the tension of the previous night. James and Ahyoka had survived the attack of the Outlaws, and for the first time in many days, they could breathe without fear of being hunted. The night had been long and exhausting, but it had also revealed something new in both of them, a strength, courage, and a connection that neither had expected. James stepped outside the cabin, letting the fresh morning air fill his lungs. The desert looked peaceful in the early light, the shadows of rocks stretching long across the sand. The horses grazed nearby, their soft snorts blending with the quiet sounds of the waking desert. James glanced back at Ahyoka, who was carefully tending to a small fire they had kept alive overnight. Her movements were deliberate, calm, and precise, a contrast to the fear she had shown the night before. She had grown stronger through the trials of darkness, and James felt a quiet admiration for her resilience. "Are you ready to move on?" James asked, his voice soft but steady. Ahyoka looked up at him, her eyes clear and determined. "Yes," she said.
"But where will we go? I can't go back to the village yet."
They would still be after me if the Outlaws tell anyone.
He had lived in the desert long enough to know places few others knew. There were hidden trails, abandoned cabins, and rocky outcroppings that could offer protection. "We'll go to a place I know," he said.
It's far from the main roads, and they won't find us there easily. You'll be safe. Ahyoka followed closely as James led the horses down a winding path through the canyon.
The rocks provided cover, and the narrow trail made it impossible for anyone unfamiliar with the terrain to approach unnoticed.
As they walked, Ahioka finally began to speak more freely, sharing details of her life and the artifact she carried. She explained that it was not only sacred but also a symbol of her people's history, their strength, and their identity. Losing it would have been a disaster, not just personally, but for her entire community.
James listened intently, his respect for her growing with every word.
He had faced many challenges in his life, and he had learned that courage could take many forms.
Ahioka's bravery was different. It was quiet, unassuming, and rooted in something far deeper than fear or survival. It was the courage to protect something valuable, even at great personal risk. As the day wore on, they found a hidden cave nestled in a rocky hillside. It was small but dry, and the entrance was well concealed by boulders and overgrown shrubs. James helped Ahioka settle inside, and they arranged the horses nearby so they could rest. For the first time since the chase began, Ahioka felt a sense of safety she had not known in days. She sat down on a flat rock, her hands resting on her knees, and took a deep breath. "You've done so much for me," she said quietly, looking at James with gratitude. "Bess, I don't know how to repay you." James shook his head, smiling faintly. "You don't need to repay me. You've already done your part. You were brave, smart, and quick."
I couldn't have done it without you. Ahioka smiled, a small but genuine expression that lit up her face.
For the first time, she felt that she was not alone in the desert, that there was someone she could rely on. The bond they had formed during the chase and confrontation had grown stronger, built on trust, courage, and mutual respect. The hours passed as they shared stories of their pasts. James spoke of his days as a soldier, the lessons he had learned about trust and perseverance, and the reasons he had chosen to leave the world of conflict behind. But Ahioka listened with fascination, occasionally asking questions about the battles he had faced and the people he had met.
In return, she shared her experiences growing up in her village, the traditions of her people, and the importance of the artifact she carried.
Their conversation flowed easily, a rare and comforting rhythm in the middle of a desert that had once felt hostile and unforgiving.
As the afternoon sun climbed higher, James and Ahioka decided it was time to move again.
They needed to find a more permanent, safe place, somewhere the outlaws could not reach even if they tried. James led them along a hidden trail that wound through the desert, over rocky hills and past small oases. The journey was difficult, but it was also a chance for both of them to appreciate the quiet beauty of the land. The desert was harsh, but it was also alive with color, sound, and life. Birds called from the cliffs, small lizards darted across the sand, and the wind carried the scent of distant flowers. During a brief rest, Ahioka approached James with a question that had been on her mind. "But why did you help me?" she asked softly. "You didn't know me. You could have ignored what was happening." James paused, thinking carefully before answering. "Because I know what it's like to need someone and not have anyone there. And because it's the right thing to do. Sometimes we meet people in our lives who need help, and we have the choice to act or to turn away. I chose to act. That's all." Ahioka nodded, understanding the depth of his words. She felt a sense of connection to James that went beyond gratitude. He had risked his life without hesitation, and that selflessness had left a lasting impression on her. She realized that her life had changed because of him, not just because he had saved her, but because he had shown her that trust, courage, and kindness could exist even in a world filled with danger. As the sun began to set, they reached a secluded valley surrounded by high cliffs. A small stream ran through it, and patches of grass provided grazing for their horses. James knew this would be the perfect place to rest and plan their next steps. He helped Ahioka settle the horses, and then gathered stones to build a small protective barrier near the stream.
The valley was hidden from the main trails, and anyone who tried to find them would have a difficult time navigating the cliffs and rocky terrain.
That evening, as they sat by a small fire, Ahioka finally allowed herself to relax completely. She had survived the chase, the confrontation, and the uncertainty of the night bay. She had faced fear, and she had come out stronger. James sat beside her, his presence calm and reassuring. The firelight danced across their faces, casting shadows on the rocks behind them.
You know, Ahioka said quietly, I thought I had to do everything alone.
I thought trusting anyone would be dangerous. But tonight, with you, I feel like I've learned something different.
I feel like it's okay to rely on someone sometimes.
Bay. James smiled, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight.
It's not weakness to trust someone, he said.
It's strength. It means you have the courage to open your heart and share the burden.
And I think you've shown more courage than most people I've met in my life. Ahioka looked at him, feeling a warmth she hadn't known before. The events of the past days had brought them together, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition that they had changed each other's lives. They had faced danger, survived together, and built a bond that was stronger than fear, greed, or uncertainty. As night fell, they kept the fire small, but they talked quietly for hours, sharing dreams, hopes, and thoughts about the future. Ahioka spoke of returning to her village one day, protecting her people and keeping the sacred artifact safe. James spoke of continuing to live in the desert, helping those in need, and finding a sense of peace he had long sought. By the time they fell asleep under the stars, they both knew that life would never be the same. The desert, once a place of solitude and danger, had become a place of connection, trust, and hope. The events of the night had changed them both, not just in the way they faced the world, but in the way they saw themselves and each other. When morning arrived, the valley was bathed in soft light. The desert was calm, the streams sparkled, and the world seemed at peace. James and Ahioka prepared to move again, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had survived fear, danger, and uncertainty together. Now they were ready to embrace a future shaped by courage, trust, and the bond they had forged in the heart of the desert. As they rode through the valley side by side, James felt a sense of purpose and hope he had not known in years. Ahioka felt a quiet confidence, knowing she was not alone and that together they could face anything. The desert stretched endlessly before them, vast and wild, but no longer threatening. It had become a place of growth, courage, and unexpected friendship. And in that moment, both James and Ahioka knew that everything had changed.
The night of danger, the chase, and the confrontation with the outlaws had not only tested their strength, they had revealed the courage, trust, and resilience that would guide them in the days to come.
Their lives were forever intertwined, shaped by the trials of the desert and the bond forged under the stars. The journey ahead remained uncertain, but they faced it together, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever the desert had in store. Fast. And for the first time in a long while, both felt a sense of peace, hope, and a quiet joy that comes from knowing that sometimes the most unexpected events can change your life forever.